welcome everybody to this cybersecurity chat. Today, I am joined by Laura Nelson, our CEO, and Christine Harding, my cohort in crime here, I guess, with the cyber chats. We're very pleased today to welcome once again Debbie Plunkett, who's been on our cyber chat several times before, and so we really appreciate you taking the time, Debbie. Debbie will be sharing us today a few notable and trailblazing African American men and women in cybersecurity. We're honoring the Black History Month and Women's History Month in these talks itself. Ms. Plunkett is, in fact, a trailblazer herself. 30 years of service in cybersecurity. She's a former director of the Information Assurance Directorate at the National Security Agency, where I had the great honor of working for her. That was a great time. She also served as the director on the National Security Council at the White House for 2 administrations. Now, since her retirement, Debbie has become extremely busy. She is the principal for Plunkett Associates, LLC, a consulting firm. She's also a senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center for Science and Technology. And my goodness, finally, she's an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland University College Graduate School in cybersecurity. So we're very grateful, Debbie, that you're here with us today and have a few moments to share about this great topic and really talk about some of the leaders in this career field. So with that, Debbie, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation for hosting these chat sessions, which, my goodness, I wish they were around when I was in high school or middle school so that I could get some insights into opportunities in the field, in the cryptologic field and in the intelligence community in the U.S., within the United States. So it is my great pleasure to be here with you today. I have a couple of slides that I've talked to, and again, please feel free to ask questions. Let me get my slides teed up here. As Mark said, I'm going to talk about a couple of different notable, really giants at NSA, both women and men, both minorities and non-minorities, who made an indelible impact on NSA as an organization and as a mission, and certainly an impact on the people that they represent, whatever community they might have belonged to, whether it's a minority community or a female community, or even a male community. And the first, and by the way, as I was preparing for this, pretty exciting for me, because I actually knew of all of these people that I'm going to talk about. I didn't know them all, but I knew of them. And this first one, I actually had an opportunity to meet. And she is really a giant when we think about African-American women at NSA who really made a tremendous impact and reached a fairly significant level of accomplishment within the agency. And so it's Minnie Kinney, who is an expert in languages. She served at NSA for 43 years, joining initially as a communications clerk. And she came in at a grade that was really a grade 4, pretty low level grade, but actually a higher grade than was being offered to most African Americans at that time. She was an expert in so many different areas, which most impresses me. An expert in languages, and maybe you know, NSA has a very, very large cadre of language expertise and individuals with expertise in many different languages. But Minnie was also an expert in cryptanalysis and in something really dear to my heart, traffic analysis, because that's how I came to NSA and learned to be a traffic analyst. She was really impressive in all of her work, but also most impressive because she was able to impact and affect change at NSA in the areas of policy and structure, and she was able to give hope to an emerging cadre of minority personnel at NSA, give hope that there was an opportunity to achieve a level of excellence that before then really perhaps could not even have been a dream. And she inspired many to that change. She was recognized for her contributions with 2, top-of-the-line awards, the Meritorious Civilian Service Award and the Exceptional Civilian Service Award, both of which are awarded by presidents of the United States, in her case, President Ronald Reagan and President George Bush Sr. She filled a whole lot of high-level positions at NSA, the top of which was serving as the director for the Deputy assistant director for training at our National Cryptologic School, where she was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the school. She was ultimately inducted into the NSA's Cryptologic Hall of Honor, which is, if you have an opportunity to ever visit Maryland and now ever visit our museum, you'll see her proudly being recognized there. So Minnie Kinney, just a giant in the field, and someone like me coming into NSA in 1984, she was one of the names that I heard about, and she was one of the people that I aspired to grow and be like. So the next is Wilhelmina Ware. Wilhelmina came into the NSA in 1949. She was a card punch operator. And to give you some context, my goodness, what in the world is a card punch operator? Oh, I had to kind of look that up. But way, way, way back when, we actually used machines in order to be able to punch information that we could then use to save that information to be used for other applications, very basic applications. When I came to NSA, believe it or not, we didn't even have individual computers on our desks. I shared a computer. It was called a Delta Data, big old computer with 4 or 5 different people. And we just scheduled time to go sit at the desk where the computer was located. And we didn't have printers, by the way. We went in the basement to get our traffic. Well, Miss Ware came in during some of those early days too. In 1952, she was ultimately promoted to be a key punch operator and ultimately began to teach a comprehensive key punch course to the agency's first hearing impaired employees. Later, she became a computer science instructor at the National Cryptologic School, that same National Cryptologic School that we just talked about with Minnie Kinney. And she taught an introduction to computer systems operations. She was ultimately promoted to the chief of the Learning Center, where she was instrumental in instituting a number of different programs, including the implementation of the sign language course. And ultimately, in 1980, she spearheaded the development of the agency's instructional television program, which was, by the way, I really believe a precursor to what we're doing right now. It's teaching on television. She did that in partnership with the University of Maryland as well as George Washington University. Again, Wilhelmina Ware, another giant in NSA and a giant in the area of a minority female leadership. The next individual is someone that I knew very well, Brigadier General Neil Robinson, an intelligence officer with a significant amount of experience. He was appointed to the United States Air Force Academy in 1970, and after graduating, he became an intelligence officer in really some of the toughest areas of the world. Think about South Korea, Iran, where, by the way, he was taken as a hostage during the 1979 Iranian crisis. He served in Panama and Italy and in Germany, had multiple tours in the United States, at the Pentagon in Texas, and at Fort Meade in Maryland, which is where I met him. He was the head of intelligence for the European Command during the Kosovo War, and his reputation was that he approached every job with dedication and with a focus on producing results. He had a quiet but a commanding demeanor and was so very widely respected. He retired in 2005, continuing his service in industry, working for Oracle. And unfortunately, sadly, General Robinson passed away in May of 2017 after a battle with cancer. But what a giant. And it's important that we talk about giants in uniform, minority giants in uniform, men and women in uniform, because they are such an important part of the great work that's being done in the cryptologic community. Brigadier General Neil Robinson. Next is someone that I did not know, but I learned about in a kind of interesting way. Hilda Faust Matthew was one of the driving forces behind developing security controls for network protection. Again, something really dear to my heart because it's an area of the NSA mission that I worked in most towards the last third of my career. She was an early advocate for recognizing network vulnerabilities, weaknesses in networks occur, and she had to push really hard to get the institution to both believe and embrace this concept. And this was, really, really early days. In the 1960s, her understanding of conventional machines, and particularly crypto machines, led her to conclude that the government's computer networks were vulnerable to attack. Well, that's heresy almost. Who would believe that? But she was able to convince the government that it was important enough that the government should dedicate resources to be able to protect those networks. And so when the director of NSA ultimately established the Department of Defense's Computer Security Center in 1981, it was a natural for her to be appointed Chief of Research and Development for Computer Security. She formulated some controversial concepts, and that's an important thing to talk about at this point, because all work is not popular, all work is not positively accepted. But in her case, she was so dedicated to it and so convinced that she was on the right track that she stayed the course and continued to work and communicate with senior leaders, such that she was ultimately able to develop a concept regarding computer network exploitation and to convince leadership that it was worthwhile. It was worthwhile to invest resources in it. It was worthwhile to invest capacity. She was able to recruit the first engineers to begin developing targets and exploitation. And I can confidently say to you today that her work and her vision evolved into what continues to be a major area of focus within the cryptologic community and within the National Security Agency. She retired in 1992 before really seeing her vision come to reality. But her visionary ideas and her knowledge, and it's important to say that she established her credentials as an expert in the field. And that was what got her an audience with senior-most leaders that gave her an opportunity to make the case for this being a really important area to invest resources into. She was ultimately, I got to know her because I had the honor of sitting on the NSA Hall of Honor panel in 2018 when she was inducted into the panel. And so what a wonderful legacy for her and for the agency, Hilda Faust Matthew. And then finally, but certainly not least, Anne Cara Christie. Miss Cara Christie began her career at NSA during World War II and actually joined one of NSA's predecessor organizations initially as a cryptanalyst, someone who understood codes and understood how to break codes. She served as the Chief of Research and Operations, primarily in an area of the world that we were very focused on as a nation, and that was the Soviet Union. And in addition to her management duties, she served on a number of different panels and committees, providing technical support, providing career support to other cryptanalysts, providing mentoring. She chaired a special panel that was convened by the NSA director at that time, Admiral Inman, to identify the next generation of likely NSA senior executives, many of whom later not only became senior executives, but became key leaders at the highest level of the National Security Agency. Most notably, in 1980, Ms. Cara Christie was named the NSA's 6th deputy director and the first female deputy director of the National Security Agency, and she served in that role until August of 1982. As the NSA deputy director, she was responsible for a large variety of activities relative to the NSA, to include recruitment and training and personnel. She retired in 1982, but that didn't retire her really. She continued to be very active. President Clinton named her to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board in 1993, and she served as a consultant to NSA's Scientific Advisory Board. Anne Cara Christie, the first female deputy director of the National Security Agency and another giant in our field. So what I hope you've taken from this is, when we talk about all these individuals, what is it that has distinguished them and made them so notable? Names that you can see in our museum, names that if you walk through the halls of NSA and you stop and ask someone, they're likely to be familiar with. What is it that made them so notable? The first is that each of them became an expert in something, and that's important. They became an expert in cryptology. They became an expert in cryptanalysis or in languages, in engineering, on computer networks. And they honed their skills in that area, both building an academic foundation, but then also applying it to work and became known for being experts in those areas. They also were able to engage in efforts to get support and for the adoption of new ideas. They were pioneers in that regard. They were able to see a future that maybe some others couldn't. They were able to envision a space for the National Security Agency to operate in that future. And then they were able to clearly and concisely articulate that vision and convince senior leaders that it was a good place to be, to invest in. They were able to, this notion of speaking truth to power, critically important, being able to speak to leaders about maybe topics that are not so exciting or maybe not supported, but ultimately being able to speak that truth and then inspiring those around them, the people they work with, to chase their dreams and to take their risks. Every single one of these individuals were strong mentors. They embraced and took under their wing junior employees at the National Security Agency and helped them to understand the possibilities, the realities and possibilities of working hard. And then ultimately they left a lasting legacy. I hope that's obvious to you based on the great work that they've done and based on what I've shared with you today. So what if one of you actually want to work? Now, I see we have some questions.
Let me ask one of them, because
Sure.
Debbie, it was, was it difficult as a woman to get into this field?
Well, sure it was. I will tell you, when I came to NSA in 1984, certainly there were other women around for sure. I was almost always the only minority woman for many, many, many years. And so what it took was, first of all, you've got to get in the door. And the way to get in the door is to get a college, to do well in college, to focus your efforts on areas that you believe and others will have told you would position you for the career that you want to have, whether it's being a mathematician or a language analyst or a crypto analyst or traffic analyst, and then putting your head down and working really hard. And that's the case whether you're a woman or a man. That's the case whether you're minority or non-minority. But but for minorities, it is an extra challenge to work extra hard because there weren't many. I could not look above me and see many who looked like me, right? And so I had to work hard to pave that path.
What kind of college major would you choose if you wanted to work at NSA?
Wow, that's a loaded question because NSA has so many different career fields and opportunities. It really comes down to really what do you want to do? And so I will tell you that math is a very popular topic. We hire lots of mathematicians. It is crown jewel for the NSA, that the mathematicians that we have. Computer scientists, of course. Engineers, all kinds of engineers. So engineering is an important field. I would specifically hone in on computer network exploitation and attack and engineering and operations as an area of importance. But it's easy to go with those technical areas and say, the way to get in is to get to one of those technical areas. But guess what? NSA needs good writers. They need great communicators. They need policy folks who both understand and can communicate and deliver policy messages. I had an opportunity to serve in multiple policy roles, even though my career path was a little bit more technical. And so serving as a foreign relations officer and having to negotiate both for the NSA as well as in my case, I had an opportunity to negotiate for the United States in some instances. So being able to speak articulately is important. Being able to write is important. So I'd say the first question is, what do you want to do? And the second question then is, and can I do this at NSA? And then finally, how can I best do it? I am certain that there are people at NSA who would stand ready to point you to some directions. NSA has internships for high school students, summer internships. I think they're still doing. I'm not sure with COVID how that's working right now, but we're coming out of COVID, so hopefully that will be a thing of the past. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great advice, Debbie. Thank you. And they're still putting questions in, so we'll come back to you in a second.
Sounds good. So let's just, hopefully this is a great lead in here. You want to work in the intelligence cybersecurity, here's what you need to do. In short, it is much more than this. The first is focus on doing well academically in every single one of your topics. Believe it or not, it makes you a well-rounded individual. It also is a reflection of your seriousness, of your dedication, of your commitment to doing well academically. So get good grades. It's important. Maybe it sounds lame, but it really is important to get good grades. They will follow you, and it's important. Well, there are lots of opportunities available to you at this point in your lives to learn from experts in the field, whether it be people who are currently working in the field or people who may have previously worked in the field. And in that regard, I'm talking about things like internships that I just spoke about, where you can come in and spend a summer or a week or a month with an expert, just sitting beside them, watching what they do, asking questions. There are lots of speaker tours, speakers all over, where you can now, with the advent of YouTube and Zoom all over the place, you can have an opportunity to sit in the comfort of your home and learn from experts in the field. Reading is really important. Staying current on, reading a newspaper, staying current on advances in your area of interest, technology advances, or policy advances from a world perspective. Things like, I'll give you an example, privacy. It's a great topic that's being discussed right now worldwide. Why is it important? Because social media outlets are being called to task because of concerns about our privacy being violated and perhaps them not protecting it as much as they should. And so get smart about that kind of thing so that as you decide to go into college and decide where you want to focus your academic attentions post high school, you're able to contribute right away in meaningful discussions, even on campus. Watching different multimedia productions, there are just so many different, again, the internet provides many of these opportunities for you. And then finally, making sure you are pursuing higher level learning opportunities. We used to always talk about get that 4-year college degree. You must get that 4-year college degree, and it's still very important. But community colleges today are doing a phenomenal job of training students out of high school in those first 2 years of academic experience. And in many instances I continue to hear about, students are able to leave community college in some instances and go into a work experience where they can either then work and simultaneously continue those last couple of years to get the 4-year degree, or get enough on-the-job training to be able to continue without that. So I would, encourage you to begin thinking about where you'd like to be able to go for college. Find those colleges that have credible academic offerings in the areas of your interest. And again, go back to number one, do well academically, because that's the way to get in.
Oh, we have a question about finding a voice, participating in those meetings that you talked about. And they wanted to know kind of your advice, especially from a woman and a minority woman. And how do you go about finding that strength or that approach to being able to participate and making sure your voice is heard?
Wow, that's a great question. So I go back to me, the importance of establishing your credentials in whatever field you are an expert in. I would have never had an opportunity to aspire to the levels that I was able to achieve at NSA if I had not established a foundation of excellence in traffic analysis, which is what I trained to do. Because I worked at that hard for a number of years, I had credibility. And because I had credibility in that area, it became increasingly easier as I progressed in seniority and in grade to have more difficult conversations or to get that voice. It was never, ever completely easy. And there were times, even as a senior most executive at NSA, There absolutely were times where I felt like I didn't have a voice, but I didn't never let that put me down, by the way, never got me down. I used it as an opportunity to go back and find my voice. There are always, my experience was that there are always people who are willing to give you a hand and pull you up, who are willing to open a door for you, who have enough confidence in you and your demonstrated ability to make a way for you. And you have to be willing to take advantage of that and be willing to ask sometimes.
What was one of your most challenging things, and what was one of the fun things that you got to do while you were at the agency?
Oh my goodness, that most challenging thing comes up every single time, doesn't it? So, and because I largely lived in a classified world, there are a lot of challenging things I can't talk about, but one I can. I was what we called a baby senior. So I was a senior executive at NSA, but had fairly recently become that. And I was asked to serve on a board that was, it was a newly formed board that was responsible for making the decisions and or recommendations about promotions and jobs for the senior executives at NSA. So the senior most workforce at NSA. And I was asked to join this newly formed board. Now, I was the junior. I was very, very junior on that board. And I was there because there was a requirement that they needed a minority to serve on the board. I knew that. I mean, no one said it, but I knew it. And I knew I was the junior most because I looked around the table and saw people who were very senior to me on that board. And so we put our heads down to begin to do the work of this board after being given our charge. One of the first tasks for us was a significant one that required us to identify some after work hours. Now, for this cadre of folks, to include me to some extent, but not as much as these other seniors, there was no time during the workday for work after work. It had to be nighttime and weekend. And so the task to us was, let's identify nights and weekends where we were available to work. Okay, I was quite familiar with working nights and weekends. However, I had a daughter, my husband and I had a daughter who was starting 12th grade. And I had made a commitment to her that I would not miss not one volleyball game, not one basketball game, not one band concert unless I was traveling. My commitment to her was I was going to be there. I was not going to miss her 12th grade year. So lo and behold, I have a dilemma because all of the dates that came in for this board to meet were during the workday. After the workday, but during the work week. And volleyball was Monday and Wednesdays. So there was my problem. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to tell this board that I'm not available on Mondays and Wednesdays, and that'll probably be the end of me on this board. But you know what? I shared it with them. I explained to them I'd made a commitment to my daughter, and I was intending to keep it. And there was silence around the room for a couple minutes, and then everybody said, okay, so we won't be meeting between these hours on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I'll tell you what, the first time I came back to this board after a volleyball game and sat down, the very first question was, how'd she do? And that to me said, everybody gets it. We have life, you have work, you have family, you have commitments, but being honest and being open I felt like for me, with my commitments, paid off. So that might not have sounded like such a big challenge. It was a big challenge to me at that time. It felt like a really big challenge because I didn't want to disappoint our daughter and I didn't want to disappoint NSA. But at the end of the day, I just felt like my daughter will remember. NSA might not, right? And then what was the second question, Mark?
The second question was a fun thing that you got to do.
Yeah, man. I got to travel the world, literally. When I retired 5 years ago, as I was preparing for my retirement, I remember adding up all of the countries I'd visited at that point, and I think it was 41, I think. I got to see the world. And it was, there were times when I only knew that I was in this place because I got on and off the plane. I didn't get to see much of it. I got off the plane and I went to meetings and I got back on the plane. But I literally got to see the world. And it was, the other thing I'll say, which was pretty cool, when I worked at the White House, I was able to take our kids bowling in the White House bowling alley in the basement. And that was pretty cool too.
Well, that's a follow-up question. You served under two administrations. And did you ever think early in your career that you would be working down in the White House? And could you kind of share with these students what it's like? I mean, you see the West Wing on TV and you see how they portray all that stuff, but you actually worked there. So maybe you can share a little bit of that experience.
I have several highlights of my career, and that was absolutely a highlight. And I think it's important for you to hear a short blurb on how I actually got there, because I think affirms everything that I've talked about with regard to how can you be successful. So I had an opportunity. I was in a development program at NSA where basically I was moving around every year to a new job just to learn different aspects of the NSA mission. And one of the requirements was that I had to go out of the building for a year. And I casually mentioned this to a woman who was very senior to me, who just happened to stop me and ask me, how's it going? How's it going in your development program? And I said, okay, I need to find an external assignment next. And so that was the end of the conversation. Well, lo and behold, she comes back to me some point later and says, I have an idea. I'm going to make a phone call and I'm going to get back to you. And so I said, great, certainly. And she made a phone call. Well, she didn't tell me she was calling the White House. She happened to know someone who was working there on the National Security Council. And lo and behold, the next thing I knew, I was being invited to come down for an interview. And so first life lesson for me there was, there are champions for you everywhere that you will not even know, people who will advocate for you, without you even asking. Once you've demonstrated your commitment and your dedication and your capability and your values, by the way, critically important. So she advocated for me and I got to go to the White House. I was there for the last 6 months of President Clinton's term, which was pretty cool in and of itself because I was there when we actually had to pull the hard drives out of our computers on the 19th of January, and they literally take them away because of the Presidential Records Act, and you get a new hard drive on the 20th of January with a new president. And anything you wanted to keep, you had to request to keep it in writing. Pretty interesting. And then I was there for the first 7 months, I guess, of President Bush. It was exciting. Every single day I got out of my car and walked into the White House and said, I can't believe I'm walking into the White House. We had an opportunity to literally develop and implement policy. I worked on some early computer security and information assurance policies that all ultimately became endorsed by the White House and published as policies. I had a chance to create a program that exists today called CyberCore that encourages and gives academic scholarships to students who study in the areas of computer science and information assurance. I had an opportunity to meet a bunch of presidents. Who would have thought? I have great pictures, by the way. And it was a fabulous opportunity. Really, really was. That White House is smaller than you might think. It looks like a huge place, but the West Wing, which is where I spent time, as well as the Eisenhower building, where my office was, are small but historically beautiful spaces.
Thank you, Debbie. That's really kind of cool. You kind of talked about it in a second, somebody watching out for you and finding a really cool space out the White House. Can you talk a little bit about mentoring and what mentoring meant to you and how you mentored people and maybe what these students should be looking at as far as finding somebody to help them as well?
Yeah, I just, that's a great question, Mark. Thanks. I can't speak enough about the importance of mentoring. There is no way I would have achieved any level of success without the guidance and support of people who took me under their wing and told me the good, the bad, and the ugly, by the way, not just all the good stuff, but who also made a way. I say that really deliberately because there were times when, there were people who advocated for me to get a certain job, who made phone calls like the one I just shared with you about, who pulled me aside and said, that thing you said just now just didn't go over very well, and here's why. I have mentors at every level of my career. In my early career, they were more likely to be supervisors because those are the people that I was closest to. But as I progressed in my career, I became a little bit more deliberate about making sure I found mentors that served in ways that I aspired to be, who demonstrated values that I shared. And then I would go and I'd get on their calendars and go meet with them and ask their advice and get their support. I would tell you that the vast majority of my mentors did not look like me. The mentors, if I were to call out names of the people who were most influential in my career, they were largely white men because they were the ones who were in positions of authority and positions to be able to make things happen. But they did, and they did for me. And so I really can't say enough about it. And so my turn to pay back was to take as many as I could. And I did have as many mentors as I could, literally as I could take. And, everybody didn't respond positively to it. Everybody doesn't want to hear the bad news about themselves, or everybody only wants to hear good news or only wants good things to happen. But mentoring means getting all the news. I remember in one instance, a supervisor said to me, Debbie, you do not have a poker face. And what that means is that when you're in a meeting and someone's presenting a new idea, everybody's looking at your face and they can see already whether you like it or not. And then that kind of puts a damper on the deal if someone's up there briefing and they see you don't. And I so appreciated that piece of feedback. And so I had to develop a personal strategy for how I can keep my face straight in meetings so that I'm not influencing the decision or influencing other people's opinions. That's the kind of mentoring you want. You want someone who's going to be honest with you, but also who's going to give you a hand and pull you up, give you an opportunity.
What was the biggest failure or challenge of your career, and how did you overcome it?
Wow. Failure. So at the National Security Agency, there is a place called the NSA, it's NSOC, Security Operations Center, I think it is now.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It is sort of the heart, 24/7 of NSA operations. And they communicate worldwide. They represent the director in many instances, particularly during the middle of the night. And it's a cool place to work. And it is a place that many are mentored and encouraged to spend some time in. And so I had two opportunities to work there. And in both instances, I didn't take the opportunity. In one instance, I was concerned because we have two children. I was concerned that they were too young, that I wouldn't be available for them enough, as much as people tried to convince me otherwise. And the second opportunity, I was encouraged not to take it because it was too late for me in my career to take it. So, was it a failure? I wish I had done it. I wish I had worked in the NSA Security Operations Center to broaden my perspective, give me that bigger picture of the National Security Agency. So how did I handle it? I overcame it by being, I think, the first NSA Information Assurance Director who had significant SIGINT and information assurance experience. So I worked on both sides of NSA significantly. And, did it overcome? I don't know that it overcame that particular weakness in my portfolio, but it broadened my perspective, gave me certainly a broad perspective of NSA.
Thank you, Debbie. We really appreciate you being with us today. We're winding down on our time here, so I just want to say thank you on behalf of the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation for joining us today on this cyber chat. It was very informative and really enjoyed the stories that you shared with us. Do you have any parting comments before we go?
Well, I would say dream big. That was the last point on the slide. You can be absolutely anything, in this world today, so many wonderful opportunities. And I am so encouraged by, as I meet and talk with young people about their big ideas. And I just encourage you to dream big, and I look forward to seeing you in the workspace because we need you. The work is not going away by any stretch.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. One of the websites on my little graphic behind me is cyberseek.org. And students, if you haven't gone to cyberseek.org, please do, because you will find there's over 500,000 openings in cybersecurity. As Debbie said, we need you in this profession. So, Debbie, thank you once again for being with us. And we look forward to a future opportunity for you to share with our students.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.